recovering from your mistakes.
Hello, we are live talking about parenting. This is Ask Dr. Dan. This is a few days after Christmas, well in the thick of Hanukkah. Hope you all had a good Christmas for those of you who celebrated, and for those of you celebrating Hanukkah, I hope you're having a good one, and it lasts the several days as it usually does. This show is brought to you by Parent Footprint and our online e-course called Parent Footprint Awareness Training. We are all about becoming aware as parents, living our lives more fully, and modeling for our kids the adults we want them to be. We have a huge responsibility as parents, and that is to teach our kids what's important in life. And what we find at Parent Footprint is when we're aware of what's important to us, when we know where we've come from, when we know what we want for our kids, we can take inventory, we can take stock, and we can put together a plan that will have the outcome of raising the kids that we want in this world, which will then help have the kids and have the grandkids have the same thing. Like, this is the long haul, guys. Madeline Levine, who is an author and psychologist I have a lot of respect for, says we are raising future adults. So even though we got to focus on right now, we have to think about what we want for our kids' future and our grandkids, so we can have a more loving place with more compassionate people, particularly in this day and age. So today's topic, which was put together by the Parent Footprint think tank, is a digital media break. How we can use digital media breaks to have family connectivity and positive experiences. So I have a few quick stories here. So one story that I was just told by a good friend is that he took his young kids to the park. And as he was at the park, he saw that his daughter had got onto his iPhone when he wasn't looking. And his daughter was watching YouTube videos of the Kardashians at the park while they were at the park. And he said, "Oh my God, what is wrong with this picture?" And you know what? It sounds funny for me to say this, but we all have had the same experiences. And I think we have to think, like, what's going on here and what do we need to do about it? A personal one is last night at a family function with extended family and lots of our kids and all of their cousins on this long couch. So great to have. See, there's about 8 of them, 9 of them together, having a great time, sitting on each other's laps, arms around each other. And I would say of the 9, at least 7 of them had their phones out and were looking at their phones. Now, a little consolation is they were showing each other, they were taking pictures with each other, Snapchatting each other, and they were largely engaged with each other. But in between, in a millisecond, they can Snapchat at least 3 friends and connect a story and, all this stuff. And so I think the first thing that we need to think about is accept our current environment. So a lot of us are fighting the technology with our kids. One thing is, we're in a social experiment right now. We don't really understand the ramifications of technology, and it is definitely here to stay, even though it's evolving very quickly. But we need to accept this is how our kids are growing up, especially with you guys with young kids. They don't know life without smartphones. There is no existence without a smartphone or an iPad or a tablet. Life does not exist without it. Now there's devices in the home where they can just ask this device to turn on lights, to turn the channel, ask them any piece of information that we used to have to go to the library for or look something up in the dictionary. So what we need to be aware of is it's here and we need to accept it. Now that's the playing field. We're going to talk more about that in a second. The other thing that we need to be aware of is how much we adults are modeling and using technology. I remember the specific client who dad had a career, a very successful career in the Silicon Valley with technology, a real innovator. And the parents' main complaint was that their son was, sort of addicted, so to speak, to technology. He was always on screens, always on games, this nonstop. And the son said to the dad, I don't get it. You're on the computer all day long, literally all day long. And when I'm on it, when I can't be on it when I'm at school. So when I'm on it outside of school, it's as if you're saying that I can't be on it, but you can. And the dad said, well, that's because I'm working on projects. I've got a lot of projects and emailing, and I'm, connecting to people. And he said, that's exactly what I'm doing. I've got a lot of projects. They might be gaming projects. I'm connecting to my friends. We are actually building a campaign to take down this czar in this, role play game. And so when we're always on screens, we have to think about, how much credibility do we have and how do we monitor it? So what I'm always recommending to clients and trying to practice in my own home is try not to be rigid about it and trying to have conversations about it. So for example, how about a conversation? And again, you have to gauge this conversation based on how old your kids are. But how about a conversation about technology, media, and screens? And ask your kids to give you feedback about how much time they think you're on them and why they think you're on them. Just to get a sense of what they think. It might not be it might not be reality, but it might be their reality, their perception. And then you might want to ask them about how often do you think it's okay for someone their age to be on technology? And is all the technology the same? Because I can tell you when people are on their phone Snapchatting, that's not the same necessarily as being on a first-person shooter game. It's not the same as our kids who are always on their computer, but they're actually watching a lot of documentaries. They're actually studying something they're really into. So is all technology the same? Is all media the same? Or are there different categories? And then how about the notion of a collaborative process where you actually give them some say and how much they might be on it and when to be on it. Because what we know from research and from parenting is that if we're trying to raise kids to be to self-regulate and be independent, we have to give them the opportunity to self-regulate and to be independent. I had another client situation just last week where we were negotiating. I was helping negotiate with his mom about on the break how much time he could have on his Xbox, and then during the school year how much time he could have on his Xbox. And his mom asked the question that I would feel the same way as a parent, which is, but what if you don't regulate? What if you're on it for 3 or 4 hours at a time? And what if you don't save time for your schoolwork? He said, well, then, if that happens, that would be a good time for us to have that conversation. But I think you're trying to make a rule based on something that has not yet happened yet, and you're not even giving me the opportunity to show you that I can regulate it. This was a middle schooler, right? So this is an older kid. But I thought it was a great point. So a lot of us sort of parent with this in the media, which no, this is too much. And the thing is, we don't even know what too much is. The research is undecided about what too much is. So part of this we have to admit is subjective and what our own comfort level is. And I think some parents are more comfortable with tons of it and other parents are not comfortable with hardly any of it. These are your family values and everyone has to live by their family values. What I'm just recommending is bringing your kids into the conversation. Now, even though you've done that, we still need to think about where are we going to have some boundaries and some structure. We know it's best for kids to be off of technology a little bit before bedtime. Having 3 adolescents at home, I can tell you that's very difficult to do when they're listening to music and they're connecting with their friends. But if we can have some sort of nighttime structure and a go offline time, that's a healthy habit. The other thing I think to think about is what is reasonable during the school days, what is reasonable during the weekend, and what is reasonable during break. Because now, this is a time when kids are bored, there's nothing to do. Well, now they have a lot of time, often unstructured. So I think we need to help them instead of wanting them to regulate something that gives them instant gratification and is fun. I think we also need to structure some family time. Are we going on hikes? Are we going into the nearest city? Are we going to play board games? Are we going to have a family movie night? Even though that's still a screen, that's a different situation. Are we going to cook together? Are we going to exercise together? There's lots of little things that we can do to structure and fill in the time so you don't just leave your kids without any options, because to be fair to them, especially the older elementary school, middle schoolers, and high schoolers, their life is technology, and it goes largely unregulated when they leave the house. You know, what I'm surprised is so many schools and teachers allow technology all through during the day. You know, a lot of the schools don't have these no phone policies anymore. So it is just part of their daily bread and butter. All right, I'm going to turn to some questions here. We have a Canadian question. Welcome. We are doing all those things. That is awesome. Good for you. Keep doing them. Okay, here's another one. Another one just supporting that we're talking about this and how important this topic is. So to summarize here, we need to be aware that we are living in a social experiment with technology that historians and technologists are going to be writing about in decades to come. Our kids are dealing with technology as a wonderful thing that they can't get away from a lot of the time because it is so fun and interesting and is the quick cure for boredom. We need to be aware of what technology usage we are modeling for our kids because they're watching us, and if we're going to be credible about breaks, we need to take some breaks too. We need to find ways to structure family time instead of just leave them to figure out something else to do, because during this holiday break, it's a wonderful time for family outings, family movies, family board games, family cooking, other family events that are traditions. You can start traditions, but really, as much as possible, include them in the decision making so they feel empowered, and you're teaching them how to regulate their life instead of regulating for them. Again, there are times when we need to do that, but we want to save that as our trump card when they can't make a good decision, they've been a part of a process, and they can't follow what was the agreed upon solution. Then sometimes we have to step in. You know what? And half the times they thank us for it. Sometimes we have to do those hard things. There's one question here about addiction to the iPad. You know, people are starting to write more about the difference between internet addiction and gaming addiction and seeing them as different things. So on the one hand, if you always have an iPad around and you're using it for everything, it's really easy just to get used to going on to stimulate your brain, just like most of us adults do when we have a second to check our phone to see an email or a text or just check Facebook. So a question also I want to pose, you know, this whole quote addiction, you know, some people think it's possible to have an addiction to these things. Other people say we actually have to look at what the kids are using it for. If you're in the ballpark of saying addiction, that means excessive use, and it means you're really going to need to structure it, right? So if we're concerned about someone being an alcoholic, we don't keep taking them to bars. So we have to like back out the most obvious usage about how can we regulate and having time for our kids' neural networks to decompress. And sometimes it takes a lot, because a lot of times when kids get off technology and gaming after a long periods of use, they have what people notice are like a withdrawal symptom of irritability, low mood, and it takes them a little while to get back online. Minecraft is a wonderful it's a wonderful game product. It's innovative, and it is one of these things that a lot of kids, particularly bright and creative kids who love to build, are really, really into. Again, don't just assume it's bad, but you're going to have to regulate your kids, because why would you not want to build nonstop? You know, it's a funny thing. We'll let kids play Legos for 5 hours, but we have a problem with our kids playing Minecraft for 5 hours, which is sort of Lego on steroids with 3D. Interactive technology. So again, these are all the things to recognize. Okay, now remember, the most important thing for us parents to think about is being aware of our own behavior, being aware of the beliefs that drive our behavior, and thinking about how we're going to intervene with our kids and teach them in a way where it will actually generalize to more than that situation, where they won't just take away resentment for being controlled, and we can actually instill in them values that they can take with them in life and feel like they are in charge of their life while representing the family values that we are wanting them to represent. I'm going to ask you this final question as we close out the new year, or close out the old year and get